and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Hope you're well. Very pleased that this week, on one of his regular visits, I'm happy to say, Peter Hitchens, columnist for the Mail on Sunday and, of course, author of many books I'm sure you have on your library shelves. Thank you very much for coming, Peter. Thank you.
So far, it's a complete joy.
It's good to see you again. I wanted to ask something. I always look at your Twitter feed all the time. Oh, but sorry, X, whatever. What you?
Oh, let's call it Twitter.
Twitter, yes. I can't quite get used to that. But
bossed about by Elon Musk.
This is a very, very serious issue, which we are getting more kind of responses on than anything else at the moment, and that is the idea of social breakdown. And I was looking on your particular on your posting, and you actually just made a comment on what seems to be a minor thing, and that is that when you have cyclists in London ignoring what we used to call zebra crossings, ignoring pedestrian crossings, just going through them. And you make the point, because this sort of thing is happening an awful lot in different areas, you make the point that this is what happens at the beginnings, I think you said, of social breakdown. Can you go into that a little bit? You mentioned two things, the police and also religion.
Well, yes, the two things. You can't, in an ideal society, we'd all be governed by conscience entirely. Yes. We do what we did because we knew it was right, and we would refrain from doing bad things. But no such society exists or has ever existed. Then we came reasonably close to it, I think, at some point in this country. It's certainly gone now. But one of the things that I recall from my own childhood is the level of restraint. The people not wanting to make public displays of themselves, or to lose their temper, or to shout, and also things like the recognition, the observance of pedestrian crossings, which, of course, they have no signal lights to tell you to stop. You just have to see that there's someone on them and you stop. And this requires an inner resolve to keep the law, which I think people have simply lost in very large numbers. They have other ideas of what makes you righteous. I think it's particularly, I speak as a cyclist myself. I think a lot of cyclists think that they are so righteous because they ride bicycles that they don't need to be correct in any other way. They've done enough for righteousness by bicycling, and so they're exempt, or they think they're exempt from the tedious rules of
I think that. Well, certainly many of the modern cyclists, there is this kind of moral righteousness, for the environment and all the rest of it, that they have. But
these are, if you met these people in ordinary private life, you'd think of them in many cases as being civilized, capable of an ordinary conversation, unlikely to punch you in the face or go out and get drunk. They would appear to be what you might call normal, well-socialized human beings, but in this matter they just don't. And it's interesting. This is because I do think that probably the majority of cyclists are middle-class professionals rather than from poorer parts of the country, and which is an interesting thing in itself. And if voluntary morality, if the voluntary observance of basic rules of behavior is declining among such people, then how's it going among the truly poor and deprived? Of course, we live in this country in several kinds of solitude, and one of them is that most well-off people never, if they can possibly avoid it, go to the areas where the poor live, which are often thanks to the way in which our housing has been both designed and then redesigned. They're often segregated from the areas where the well-off live. And I think life is pretty hard already for a lot of people on poor housing estates.
It's not unlike the cycling example. It's not unlike queuing. You said that people had a sort of innate sense of what they should do in that situation. Queuing has pretty much disappeared, at least in London, unless it's enforced. In a commercial situation, such as in banks and things like that. Not that they...
Literally, the sensible thing to do is to ask people to take a number now, so they don't actually have to stand in the queue. And queues are a product of deprivation and shortage. If the bus doesn't come very soon, then you have to have an orderly queue. The people of the Soviet Union were very good at queuing because everything was in short supply, and it was the only way to get it. unless you were in the bribing classes, in which case you jumped the queue. Or if you were in the party elite, in which case everything was brought to you anyway. But so there's a lot of queuing there. It's not a totally good sign to have a lot of queuing. But on the other hand, if you have got services, general public services, which obviously had to be rationed in some way, then there has to be a way of doing it. And it seems right that the person who's there first for the bus should be the person who gets on it.
I mean, when you obviously...
Because you're right, it isn't as strongly enforced.
No, it's not. I mean, obviously one can go on to these more current examples like the shoplifting,
Let's bring in another example of this, though, which always makes me laugh because it is so ridiculous. I was taught from a very, very, very early age, if someone was coming towards me down a narrow corridor, so particularly on a train, the polite thing to do would be to step back and let them pass.
Yeah.
So I still do this, but the people behind me have no idea of this convention at all. They think I'm having a heart attack or something. They just barge past me. There's no point at all.
Yeah. No. It's the kind of, it's the loss of familiarity, isn't it, with particular ways of
behaving? But you can't even disapprove of it.
No.
Because they're not breaking a rule known to them. They're breaking a rule which existed in times past, which doesn't exist for them. And all those things have largely gone.
But does that mean that we're living in the kind of beginnings of a social breakdown, or do you think we're further ahead than that?
I think this has been going on for a very long time, and you could run a reasonably civilized society on that basis, that people behaved in that way.
Yeah.
If once you learn to expect it, eventually the only thing to do is almost certainly to join in. I'm very strongly socialized not to join in. But in the end, you make a fool of yourself sometimes by following these conventions when nobody else is doing it. Why should you bother? I mean, the business about cyclists and red lights, I sometimes find myself sitting on my bike at a red light while everybody else on a bicycle is going, past me. And I've learned to enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think, okay, well, this thing here, this red light, protects me from being smashed into by lorries, so I have to abide by it. And it's as far as I'm concerned, it's quite a pleasing act to understand that and behave accordingly. Even if you don't, I can't make you, but I can at least show you that there is another way of doing it.
Yes. Hello. Please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you. Can you point to any... I mean, you've been obviously chronicling Britain's social history and political history for a long time.
Seems like it.
Can you think of any particular moments where your art... Now, this is a bit of a... I hate this expression, tipping point, but this is a bit of a watershed moment on this front, on the breakdown front.
Well, I think the death of Princess Diana was a watershed moment in all the national mood, and in the shift from what remained of old-fashioned, what you might call Protestants' restrained righteousness, into a new form of public grief and righteousness by proclaiming yourself to be part of whatever was good at any given time. It was almost a return. I don't want to be rude about my brothers in the Roman Catholic Church. It was almost a return to the days before the Reformation, when you could, by acts of open piety, for instance, you could obtain indulgences and the appearance of virtue, rather than being required, as the Reformation did, to obtain virtue by the way you lived. It was almost a return to that. I felt it was very strange, and it was also very intolerant. I called it a dictatorship of grief at the time. You had to be really distressed about this, and not obviously everyone's distressed about the tragic, needless death of the young woman, but there was something much more to it than that. And if you didn't join in, you felt a strong wave of disapproval. I remember two things, that because an awful lot of people of my type were having conversations over their back garden fences with other people saying, I don't understand this, and they were saying, nor did I. But then there was the great moment at Princess Diana's funeral in Westminster Abbey when the Earl Spencer made that extraordinary speech, and the applause began among the crowds outside who were watching it on some kind of televised relay. And the congregation, who had never in their lives applauded in church and would up until then thought it a quite shocking thing to do, and also who probably didn't terrifically agree with what Earl Spencer had been saying, thought it wise to join in the applause. I thought that was a moment of revolution from which we will not recover. And it showed that the ruling class, such as it was, had absolutely no backbone at all.
Yeah.
They should have stood or sat in complete silence and let it pass. But when they started applauding, you knew that they really hadn't got any resistance at all.
I know, because you in the Abolition of Britain, that's the prologue, isn't it? It's a comparison with Diana's funeral
and Winston Churchill's, yes.
But do you?
The chapter that an awful lot of people think is the most striking in the book, and I think in some ways they're right.
Yeah. But do you think it was a bad thing? You said that was the moment of revolution.
I think it was a bad thing, yes, because I was brought up in the tradition of restraint. The caricature phrase, stiff upper lip, is a good summary. You weren't supposed to show your emotions if you could possibly help it. You were supposed to suffer in silence and jolly well get on with it.
Yeah.
This was necessary in the kind of country that we were to survive.
Yes. Do you not think that, because it was very much at that time, just to go into this a little bit, Diana and the Queen was representative of the former way of doing things. Surely by the time she died, she had a sort of triumph, hadn't she, in never not really changing in the way that she did.
No, she's just become the country's most popular grandmother. She was not beloved as monarch. She was beloved as what people imagined her to be when they saw her as a delightful and hard-working old lady. But it had nothing to do with any kind of respect for the institution of monarchy or what stood behind it.
Do you think, actually, I remember seeing you, Peter, doing one of those intelligence squares debates on the monarchy some time ago. This would have been getting off 20 years ago. Yeah. So I'm not a stalker, going around watching you or anything like that. But I remember.
I'm glad you remember it.
I do remember it, because I remember it was. It had Norman St. John Stevens, who I think a lot of people wouldn't know that was what he was a former Tory minister, wasn't he? Minister for the Arts, I believe. But he was arch kind of royalist.
Yes, he became Lord St. John of Fawsley.
That's it.
And people would joke that he was Lord Crinjohn all Fawsley.
Yes,
because of his reverence for the throne.
Yes, for Princess Margaret. But I want to, I seem to remember that in that debate, there was a time it was very rocky for the monarchy. It was around about 2005, yes, something like that.
Something like that.
You've recently talked about the king in a different context. This is about the royal train, which we'll talk about a bit later. But do you see the monarchy now as having any function? When I'm talking about social breakdown, or when I'm talking about fragmentation, the monarchy was always put forward as one of the few things that can actually kind of bind us together. Do you think that that's still there?
I think it did that. I'm not sure it was a good thing that it did that. It provided a reassurance during a period of decline and decay and social revolution, much of which people should have resisted, and because of the continued presence of the monarchy and of its traditions and its ceremonies, people thought nothing really important was going on. It may be that the monarchy helped the revolutionaries by reassuring people when they oughtn't to have been reassured. But I think that is over now. partly because Charles himself, I think, is something of a pestilential reformer, and has adopted all kinds of political positions which are far beyond the proper neutrality of the monarch, and which tend to be the positions of the modish metropolitan left, particularly the net zero issue and everything that goes with that. But also a general, the Queen herself got involved as well in making various politically correct remarks. I remember writing to the palace once about this, and he explained to me quite how the Queen is supposed to be neutral, could have said this in her Christmas broadcast, and they said, well, perhaps you better consult a constitutional expert. And I said, well, I wrote back saying, for the purposes of this correspondence, I am a constitutional expert. It looks dodgy to me.
Yes.
Well, they didn't write back.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of that.
Yes.
And I think Charles himself has made it very obvious over and over again that his politics are of a particular type.
Yeah.
Which are not mine. You know, he was once supposed to there was a plan for him to invite me round for a chat.
No,
it was scuppered by his advisors. And they said, you can't possibly meet this man, and he did as he was told, and so the meeting was cancelled.
Well, I suppose got to give him some credit there for wanting to meet you.
But not so much credit for then backing out. No, I had all the feelers. Yeah. Feelers came, and then a cold silence followed. And
because he did make us other sort of interactions, didn't he, with people like, was it Jon Snow, I think, people like that.
The first question that I was asked by the keeper of the feelers who approached me was, if you're invited to see Prince of Wales, will you blab? And I said, no, I won't blab. Yeah. I gave that. I would never have talked about it. The only reason I talk about it now is because it was withdrawn, and also because it has been written about in public places since, not by me, but somebody else has briefed, and so I felt free to discuss it. But I thought it was, I could manage without meeting the King or the Prince of Wales, who was then, perfectly well. But I thought it was an interesting indication.
Yes.
That certainly if he is the great traditionalist that he's been portrayed as, that it doesn't go that far.
Yeah. Do you think it's got a future, the monarchy? Do you think, I have to say that I was surprised actually at the impact of the coronation, you know, that it was actually remarkably, well, I thought it was impressive actually, on the scale, given the scale that it was being done on. But
I was quite disappointed.
Really?
I'm not disappointed because I knew I'd been looking at the old coronation shows for some time and working out which bits they would leave out.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah. But you see, as I say, this point is we talked about that.
This is about the bit where the King swears to ensure the punishment of wickedness and vice. That was cut out.
Yes.
No one would have noticed if he'd left it in, but I certainly noticed when he took it out.
Yes.
There was something wishy-washy about it. But it had the similitude of it, but it didn't have it wasn't really the real powerful thing that it had still been in 1953.
Yes. Was it operatic quality of it as well?
No, there's something really. It comes out of it comes out of the Middle Ages, and then had been altered to suit the Reformation. But it's a very muscular series of pledges to govern the country both with justice and with mercy. But it is a promise of a much firmer form of government than we now have, and a much tougher form of justice that we now have, and that's how it was adjusted for the new version. So I'd been looking out for it, and so I was able to see it. Well, if you hadn't studied the service, it would have gone by you.
He was still a defender of the faith, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, that's another issue, and this is much more about the coronation is fundamentally the founding document of our constitution. Everything else is based upon it, what kind of country we are. And after that, so it's a softer country, explicitly softer country than it was in 1953. It's a time when I think softness may be a mistake.
Yes. Do you think, therefore, that there used to be a role, but do you think that there is still a meaningful role?
Possibly. I think probably the difficulty is they don't really believe in it themselves. And Charles is still obviously a Christian believer. I'm not sure about the others. And he understands that that the law makes him king, and he understands also the law is based ultimately on a Christian concept of what the law should be, and he understands that compact. I don't think his heirs or successors do, or will behave as if they do. And also, since the Equality Act, the huge foundation stone of the Blairite Revolution, the Equality Act of 2010, which they presented to us shortly before leaving office, that has actually been kicked away. In any case, Christianity is now just one of many faiths, not the religion of the country. And an awful lot of other things arise from the Equality Act, which make this really by statutes an egalitarian country rather than the interesting Christian constitutional monarchy it used to be before. Huge things went on in the Blair period, many of which people are only just beginning to grasp. The Supreme Court, for instance, is another one. And this was the first Blairite coronation. And I think that a monarchy which tries to compromise too much with Blairism will find that there is no real compromise, that Blairism doesn't want, the Labour Party doesn't want. And the Labour Party has debated the monarchy for a century, not because it doesn't want to get rid of it, but because it's not felt that the time was ripe to get rid of it. And so they've waited around keeping quiet about their real feelings and being charming to it.
Yes.
But ultimately, what they want is not a constitutional monarchy. What they want is an egalitarian republic. And the two can't coexist.
You know, you just said there that people are only just realising when it comes to the constitutional changes made by the Blair government of institutions and various acts of Parliament. But are you encouraged that, first of all, that recognition has come, but also actually seems to have gone on, it seems to have been taken on board by people who are trying to formulate policy? I mean, on the right, as it were.
I don't know, because these things, once they're gone, it takes a thing based upon tradition and on custom, such as, for instance, the House of Lords or the monarchy can be destroyed in an afternoon, but have taken centuries to establish. You can't put them back. I mean, look at the poor French trying to re-establish their monarchy after they had abolished it. They couldn't do it. They tried repeatedly, and it wouldn't come off because the spirit of it had been driven from the country and will not return. So I think these things may well be irrecoverable. What I always remember is first of all, in the run-up to the 97 election, when I could see there was something really deeply fishy about the Blair project, but I couldn't work out what it was, but that it was very unwise to be complacent about it, as the Tories were. You remember John Major, after he lost the 97 election, just went off to the cricket. Yeah. Whereas Neil Kinnock, after he lost his big election, made a ferocious speech denouncing the new government and saying, do not be poor, do not be ill, do not be old. And he really hated the fact that he'd been beaten. The Tories didn't really have any sense that they hadn't been beaten. They couldn't even, when Gordon Brown sold all the gold off, a stupid mistake, their front bench Treasury spokesman couldn't be bothered to oppose it. They had to call in dear old Peter Tapsell from the back benches to oppose it, because they weren't interested. And when they started massacring the hereditary peers, which I opposed from the start, I said the House of Lords, as it stands, is a very useful part of the Constitution. The Tories would just giggle as if I was some kind of ludicrous survival from another age. Actually, we lost in the destruction of the hereditary peers a very, very useful revising chamber, which was genuinely independent of the executive, and we have not been able to replace it. The House of Lords now is a grotesque caricature, and it will have to go. I mean, even I can't find in my heart to defend this ludicrous thing that we have now. And it's gone, and they should have fought, but they didn't understand that the hereditary principle was an important thing to fight for.
Yes.
And so they let it go. And amongst other things, that left the monarchy as the last institution in the country which was based upon the hereditary principle. There was no other, so it's completely isolated and alone, which also puts it in danger. And then there's the problem of the monarch being the monarch of Australia, where I think republicanism will eventually triumph. And when that happens, I think it will be reflected back into this country. That will be the moment of true crisis.
Right.
So I wouldn't bank on it surviving. It's got a lot of enemies, and a lot of things go wrong with it, and it doesn't really believe in itself.
Well, that's the crucial thing, isn't it, Charlotte? I mean, this is...
makes concessions. It's constantly conceding concessions which it makes to people who hate it anyway. They won't stop hating it if they concede.
Also...
I just think it's weak.
Yes, it sort of seems, sort of rather frightened, doesn't want to be noticed almost. You mentioned that would be a real crisis point, but brings me to another crisis point of a huge nature. We recently had an interview on Professor David Betts, who was talking about possibility of civil war in Britain. This is something, I don't know whether you pick it up, Peter, but I mean, maybe it's our particular viewership and audience. This is really quite big at the moment online. What's your view on that? I mean, do you sort of entertain the idea that this could happen in this country even?
Well, it's be foolish under any circumstances to rule anything out, because the real underlying problem in this country, which Daniel Hannan wrote about very recently in the Sunday Telegraph, is the incredibly dangerous economic position that we find ourselves in, made even more dangerous by the recent events in Parliament and the government's failure to even begin to curb its own spending. We are a country that is so indebted, whose current account balance is so disastrous, whose ability to recover from this is so limited, that it only takes, it's a decrepit old train, to use an appropriate metaphor for the week, clattering along on a piece of pretty ropey track, but it'll carry on clattering along until it hits a major obstacle big enough to derail it. And at that point, the spectre of something which every economic policy being pursued at the moment makes certain, of very, very severe inflation. I won't say hyperinflation, but this sort of inflation which really does destroy savings and wipe out debts, which means a lot of people, of course, find it attractive, and actually eviscerates public services, because although they continue to exist in theory, the money to maintain them can't be found anymore, because it's suddenly something which cost £5,000 to run a year last week cost £1 million to run this week. Where are you going to raise that money? It will just go. And we then, the thing about catastrophes, which I've learnt from my life of traveling abroad, is that they happen. Catastrophe happened, for instance, to the Russian middle class and working class in the collapse of the Soviet Union. People who had previously had secure homes, secure jobs, education their children guaranteed, some kind of life pattern lying ahead of them which is normal. Such people could be found after a couple of years of post-Soviet economic adventures, standing by the roadside selling their possessions to pay for bread, and living their lives as ghosts of their former selves in a country which resembled the place where they lived before it wasn't the same. And I fear this. And when that happens, who can predict? It could just be major social disorder. It could just be the withdrawal of those who still have wealth and money into protected communities where they still have something resembling police and where their lives are reasonably safe, and everybody else living outside in a zone of lawlessness. Who knows what future it could bring? It's very dangerous, and also it can. We saw from the Europe between the First and Second World Wars, particularly the destruction of the savings of the middle class, leads to the creation of very dangerous political movements.
Yes, what you're describing, as you say, a major social convulsion, or kind of a sort of a revolutionary type of situation. as opposed maybe to a civil war.
Indeed. I mean, that's why I don't find the phrase civil war particularly helpful. What would a civil war be about? What, between whom
Well,
will
I think
it be
that
fought?
the way that it is being discussed is that this will be along demographic lines, along ethnic lines, and that basically the point he was putting, David Betts was putting, was that the governments at the moment were sort of engaged in such overreach in their reactions that in fact, in many ways, it's almost like they were bringing it on themselves. And it's towards the traditional white working class, you know?
Well, there has been a great arrogance among the liberal revolutionaries in Western countries over the past 50 or 60 years, which has led, in my view, to the rise of Donald Trump in the United States. Something that I almost predicted it. I wouldn't have put it in that form, but if you carry on treating large numbers of hard-working, decent people with contempt for long enough, they will eventually take some sort of revenge on you, even if that revenge doesn't do them any good, which I'm not at all sure that Donald Trump is doing much good to the people who vote for him. So maybe, but when I think of civil wars, I think of the American and the English and the Russian, and these were about strongly defined political differences over clear issues. I think some sort of social chaos and disorder in our circumstances is more likely.
Yeah.
So I would not. The term doesn't appeal to me, but it doesn't look good, is what I would say. And when the bond markets kept twitching over the last few, when they start doing that, when they start no longer believing that this country is a good debt risk, then that's where, because this is a government which borrows money to pay interest on its debts. Yeah. I mean, any individual who did that, I mean, it's a nonsense. It shouldn't be the case, and our debts are far greater than they were in '76 when the International Monetary Fund called in.
Yes,
in a much worse situation than we were then.
How far can a country go on in that situation?
Don't know, because it's that point. The train rattles on, even though the train is itself decrepit and the wheels are wobbling and the track is terrible. The train rattles on until it hits some particular major obstacle which sends it flying off the tracks. It could go on for ages, or it could be quite soon. You can more or less predict that the future is bad. What you can't necessarily say is when it will get really bad.
Yes.
So I'm not going to do that. I don't know.
Yes. But the way that you have viewed this country over the past 30, 40 years, it's basically been one of decline, isn't it, Peter?
Yes.
With the occasional hiccup, maybe.
Well, yes, of course, but I was asked many years ago, 25 years ago, what in our future we might look back on with particular regret and long to have back in our lives. And I said the moment will come when we'll look back with fondness on the days when we could have glass in our windows.
Yes. Yeah.
I still stick to that, because glass is a ridiculous substance with which to armor your house against the outside world. You can only use it if you have a very high level of civilization.
Interesting point. Yeah.
So the corrugated iron industry could be, or whoever it is, could be in for a good time if things go bad. But it is the simple we can still have glass in our windows suggests we still have a fairly strong level of social cohesion. Though, of course, there are places where you find that there isn't much glass in the windows, particularly of shops. You can always tell an area where things have gone sharply downhill when the shop fronts are plated over, and the entrance to the shop is one narrow doorway. Then you know that things are bad around here. There are places in the United States where the food in the supermarkets is now guarded by an internal fence.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, if you will stay with us, Peter, just to answer a couple of things for our members.
Sure.
But thank you very much for that. More of a ruminative chat than maybe we would have had in the past. Which
well, nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely nothing at all. But Peter Hitchens, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And we shall see you next week. In the meantime, do have a good week, won't you? Thank you. Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.